Think the ayes have it. I have received a letter from the honourable member for Wentworth proposing that a definite matter of public importance be submitted to the House for discussion, namely the threat posed to free speech by the government's proposed media reforms. I call upon those honourable members who approve the proposed discussion to rise in their places. I call the member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our democracy depends on a free press as much as it depends on free elections. The work that journalists do, the work that newspapers do and broadcasters do and website bloggers do is as important as the work that we do here as legislators. The test of a democracy, a key test, is the extent to which the press is free, and not free from anything, free from government. Around the world, the greatest threat to press freedom is governments, governments that seek to have the press tell them what they want. And we know, Madam Speaker, that every government feels it is being treated unfairly by the press. And I have to say that any government that read the press every day and was satisfied with the report would have a press that was not doing its job. The job of the press is to make governments and the powerful uncomfortable. The job of journalists is to uncover wrongdoing. The job of journalists is to hold governments to account. And I'll come to some examples, some great examples of that in a moment, which can be threatened. So when you have a government in a country such as ours, which has never sought to regulate newspapers, to interfere with the content of newspapers in peacetime, to take that step and have government involvement, government regulation, government oversight of the content and the standards which cover that content of newspapers, that is an incredibly big step. That is a momentous moment. It is the beginning of a walk that begins with the public interest media advocate and could end with a press that is virtually controlled by the government. Keeping government's hands off the press is fundamental. It is vital to our democracy. And so you would think that if a government, a competent government, were we to have one, were even to consider a step such as this, it would do so with the greatest of care, with the greatest consultation, with lengthy hearings, with extensive debate. But oh no, these so-called media reforms, a jumble of measures, each of which has virtually nothing to do with the others, some relating to licence fees, some relating to content, some relating to newspapers, a complete dog's breakfast of measures which have no coherent unity among them. This is being flung into the parliament by Senator Conroy, the Communications Minister, and the only question that his action has settled is this: he is without question the least competent minister in this most shambolic and inept of governments. And I raised that point yesterday, speaking in this House, when the Leader of the House was sitting opposite me, and I asked him to nominate a more incompetent minister, and he was unable to nominate one. So that title is absolutely without question. Now, the honourable members opposite clearly have got some other nominations for the most incompetent minister. I will put my case to you, sir. I'll put my case to you. Senator Conroy has been unable to persuade the proprietors of television stations, including Mr Kerry Stokes, that they should accept a media law package which includes a 50% cut in their licence fees. Now, anyone that cannot sell a 50% cut in licence fees to a television station proprietor must be the worst salesman of all time. Senator Conroy, I put it to you, Madam Speaker, could not sell fresh fish to starving seals. And, of course, this is a long cavalcade of incompetence. This is the same government that introduced a mining tax that generated little or no revenue. I mean, the reality is, and this gentleman's name has been bandied around today, but we should give credit where credit is due. The truth is that the only Labor politician so far that has succeeded in spreading the benefits of the mining boom is Mr Eddie Obeid. It is fair to say he spread it fairly narrowly within his immediate family. But every single one of the profound defects in the way this government operates are on display here. A lack of consultation within their own cabinet. We even had, yesterday, the Chief Executive of News Limited, Kim Williams, say that he had not been engaged by the government in the preparation and the discussions relating to this legislation. Now, whether you are a fan of News Limited or not, whether you are a fan of Kim Williams or not, they do employ 14,000 Australians. It is a large media company, and just as the government would have been well advised to consult the mining industry before they introduced that hopeless mining tax, so you should talk to the various stakeholders and interest groups within the media industry before you proceed. The reality is that this is a case of malicious, malevolent intent, revenge directed at the News Limited newspaper group, coupled with that characteristic, indelible, unmistakable Conrovian incompetence. Now, and I just say this to you, Madam Speaker, in terms of the importance of protecting freedom of speech and freedom of the press. I mentioned Mr Eddie Obeid a moment ago, and you know, remember this. It wasn't a government agency. It wasn't the New South Wales Police. It wasn't ICAC, in fact, that uncovered what appears to be the largest example of corruption in our lives. In our lives. This is on a colossal scale. It disgraces the Labor Party indelibly. And who uncovered that? Kate McClymont, one journalist, one courageous journalist working for the Sydney Morning Herald. And she was able to pursue that because of cooperation and collaboration with the ABC, cooperation between media outlets, which this government is threatening to ban. Imagine that. Imagine that. Is it a payback against Kate McClymont as well? Now, the coalition is profoundly opposed to any measures which restrict freedom of the press. We know that if we are fortunate enough to be returned to government, we will grind our teeth at the injustices meted out to us by the newspapers of the day. We will rant and rage against the unfair broadcasts and criticisms of us. We know all that, but we know that that is vital to our democracy, and we would never seek to restrict that freedom. Now, the government has tried to suggest that this public interest media advocate is just a sort of a teddy bear, is not going to involve any serious restriction on the newspaper industry. Senator Conroy told ABC AM program, "The public interest advocate when it comes to the Press Council is simply a registration function, that the Press Council itself is upholding its own positions. What Australians want to see is the media be accountable through the Press Council. The government or the advocate are not changing a single standard that the Press Council has." Yet, as we know from the language of the bill itself, the public media interest advocate will judge the extent to which standards formulated under the News Media Self-Regulation Scheme, the Press Council, deal with privacy, fairness, accuracy and all other matters relating to the professional conduct of journalism. And if this media advocate, public interest media advocate, comes to the conclusion that the Press Council is not doing its job and deregisters the Press Council, then all of its members will lose their exemptions under the privacy law, without which they are not able to conduct their business. And if a newspaper or media group that's covered decides it doesn't want to join the Press Council, as the West Australian has decided, and that should be its perfect right too, it will not have the protection of the exemptions under the Privacy Act. So this is getting the government, through this bureaucrat, absolutely directly involved in the standards that affect journalism. But there is an even more sinister element here. We have many laws that deal or relate to media industry acquisitions. And in terms of diversity and competition, the competition regulator, the ACCC, has extensive powers under its Act and, of course, has recently used them to ensure that Kerry Stokes did not buy a larger share in Fox. So there is protection there already. This new regulator will be able to approve or prevent media acquisitions if they fail a public interest test. And what does that mean? A completely vague concept, utterly unworkable in any practical sense, meaningless. Meaningless because it has no other purpose than to, in fact, protect not the public interest but political interest. Every media acquisition will require extensive consultation with the government. It will be the government that will determine who can buy what newspaper. And, of course, governments will make those decisions on political grounds, just indeed as the Labor Party government did in 1986 when it allowed Rupert Murdoch to buy the Herald and Weekly Times group. A very important point to bear in mind, a very important point, because it was not the coalition. We're accused of being, sort of lickspittles of the media moguls. Let me tell you, I've been involved with media moguls most of my life. I've never seen anything as sycophantic as a Labor politician in the presence of a billionaire. and I can say, remember this, they rant and rave about media concentration. They allowed Rupert Murdoch's News Limited to buy the Herald and Weekly Times in 1986, and that is what gave Murdoch the domination of the metropolitan daily newspaper market. But in the nearly 30 years that has intervened, Murdoch still has the same domination in the metropolitan dailies. But the slice of the overall news and information pie represented by newspapers gets smaller every day, because we have never had such a diversity of voices, courtesy of the technology of the internet, that we have available today. We have access to more news, more views, more opinion, more sources of factual information than ever before. Social media alone gives every individual their own little megaphone, and if aggregated with others, can be an enormous megaphone. It means that politicians, such as any of us, don't have to suck up to an editor or a producer to get our views out into the public domain. We can post them via social media, on our own sites, on Twitter, on Facebook, and we can be heard. We have a more diverse media world than we have ever had. And yet this is the moment, at a time when diversity is greater than ever and a time when it is actually increasing, not diminishing, this is the time when the Labor Party, the architects of the largest media acquisition in our country's history, the one that created the dominance of metropolitan newspapers that they rail against today, this is the very time when they say we must regulate the media. And we know that their motives have got nothing to do with diversity. It's got nothing to do with protecting a diversity of voices. What they want to do is pay back News Limited. They want to send a message to Kim Williams and his editors that if you don't play nice, there will be a stick waiting for you. If you don't play nice, next time you want to buy something, next time you want to buy, for example, a site or business like Alan Kohler's Business Spectator and the Eureka Report, next time you want to buy a business like that, you're going to have to pass the Public Interest Media Advocates Public Interest Test. And that's going to be, of course, whether we think you pass our political interest test. And I say this to you, Madam Speaker. If by some mischance this shambolic set of reforms manages to get through this parliament, if we are returned to government after the election, we will repeal them. If this Labor Party, this Labor government, gives to future governments the tools to manipulate the media, we will disown them and abandon them and return Australia's media to the state it has today of being free.
The members.